I don't want this video to come across sort of too critical of anyone or any particular thing, but I think it's quite clear that the dissident right is at a pretty serious crossroads right now. And I was kind of, I remembered this meme, and yeah, I kind of remembered that the other day, and I kind of thought how we have seriously entered the end of that era. Because I agreed with AA when he said, there is no movement. It's a kind of disparate collection of sort of vitalists, sort of Christians, pagans in there. Probably some sort of Machiavellians, elite theorists. It was a real mix. There was no singular ideological thread. But Trump somehow kind of symbolically held it all together. And now with the sort of tariff fallout, that it's kind of completely gone now. Yeah, so I watched about sort of an hour and a bit of AA's debate with Dan from the Lotus Eaters, which I thought was good. I think it's kind of a real macro micro bind where you've got these macro problems like the deficit, the refinancing of the debt, all this stuff that is on the horizon that you need to sort out. But any of your potential solutions can cause such like micro chaos in that, in like small companies going bust, stuff like that, that essentially that then feeds back in, you try and sort something out with a big sort of macro move, and then it causes micro chaos, and then that feeds back into more macro problems in the long run. So you're in a real bind. I mean, if there is a grand strategy, it really hasn't been clearly articulated. So I certainly, I won't tell you, I don't know what's going on. And so therefore, it's not something that I can't build an argument to defend it. So I'm just kind of watching and hoping at the moment with the markets. But I mean, it might turn into a real Black Wednesday moment for Trump. If you don't know what that is, that's basically when the pound dropped out of the ERM and Soros made a lot of money. But that basically, it destroyed the Tories' economic credibility. Like up until that point, the kind of received wisdom was Tories know what they're doing on the economy, Labour don't. Credibility, once it's gone, and you can't get it back. Yeah, because I was hoping Trump 2.0 would kind of be a bit slicker, and I think that Doge has done a good job, and I think that is a real victory for us and the American taxpayer. But at the end of the day, tech bros aren't politicians, and Trump does seem to have this ability to just surround himself with fucking idiots. And then when mistakes are made, you just blame, your advisor, and you get a circulation of the advisors, but then someone else comes in who's probably fucking worse than the last person. I mean, it kind of reminds me of when, yeah, like what was it? Giuliani said he had this really important announcement to make and then just broke off in the middle of it to try and sell cigars. And it's totally indefensible. I would say that you kind of take the beginnings of the dissident right from sort of Nick Land, Curtis Yarvin. Most kind of cultural phenomena go through what I sometimes describe as the cool cycle, which is essentially you have a group of creative people who come up with some kind of new idea, new thing, and they're sort of pushing it and it's starting to build. And as it grows, you'll get a new section of people come in who get called the fanatics. Now, they don't necessarily contribute to the creative side of the process, but they give it an audience and they put money into it. So they provide money, which then obviously helps whatever this thing is grow. And the third stage is when the grifters arrive, which is basically people who don't really care about the thing, but they just know it's popular and they seek to make money out of it. And I think with kind of the distant right, I think that like the grifting was just off the scale, and it started really really early on. I think with the exception of possibly yes, like Sargon, I don't think there's anyone who emerged from like any personality that got any kind of media attention was just a complete grifter, which kind of, so much of the energy and especially any fundraising that was done in that early stage, it all got blown on people's lavish lifestyles, and it was just, yeah, just a total waste. And once the grifters have done their thing, then you basically get the arrival of, the mass, the NPCs, what the lumpen proletariat, whatever you want to call them. And then by the time the message has been diluted to the point where they kind of get it and they're all shouting the slogans, whatever attracted the interesting creative people in the first place will have been lost, and they kind of abandon the movement and go on to the next thing, and then basically it's kind of done. Like you see it in all things, like you see it in musical genres. Like there was always the stage where people would say, oh, rock and roll is dead, punk is dead, hip hop is dead, everything's dead. It always happens. I mean, Tim Pool is a great example of someone who's just a massive grifter. I can remember, like, before I started this channel, I kind of used to think, oh, he works really hard. Like, look at all these videos he's putting out and stuff. So, give him that. But it was then when I started my channel, I kind of learned how the algorithm worked. And then I just, he just carpeted bombed the algorithm with the same video, four times a day that always included, oh, give me Bitcoin, and then would extend it to like 20 minutes just so he'd get the roll through, the mid roll ads, all that shit. And the other thing is, his show became quite big, and he just surrounded himself with total idiots like fucking Adam Krigler and that other guy who just had it was just embarrassing listening to those guys. And so all that money, and he's just achieved basically nothing. And I think he's kind of, and a lot of people of those YouTubers have kind of got themselves into a bind where, especially if they've started a company and they've employed some people, they're now trapped in this world where they have to make those 4 videos a day. Because if they don't, they're going to be fucking financially ruined. So they just have to keep the fucking slot farms running. Otherwise, they're going to be having to lay people off, and they're going to be in quite serious financial trouble. And I can remember a little while back, an incident. Dave Green, the distributist, did a really good podcast on it. I think it's Fiddler's Green podcast 48 called This Is What We Do. And I agree with a lot of what Dave said in there. But it's about the, I don't know if you know Alex Shooter. I don't know how to pronounce her name. And also kind of philosophic cat. Kind of basically got pissed off with all the sort of low-level spurging of people on the internet, and kind of they were sort of a part of the movement, and now they kind of abandoned it in a sense. And at the time, I was kind of like, oh, it's just a couple of internet spurgs. Why don't you just ignore them and just carry on? But what that is a great example of how low level people like, because I'm not saying like I didn't really ever watch Alex's show. I followed her on Twitter because she sometimes put out some sort of reasonably good tweets and seemed quite interesting. And I watched some of Philosopher Cat's videos. I mean, she definitely knows a lot about Julius Evola, sort of definitely more than I do. So she was, these people were making a positive contribution to the movement. And the reality is they've just been driven out by like low level spurgs who don't contribute anything. Um, and yeah, while I'm not, I don't wish to attack anyone sort of individually. There is this kind of issue with like like I don't like the sort of pro neat ideology kind of thing. It's totally stupid because that's exactly where the regime wanted you. You're completely powerless as a neat. And the thing is, because they've got all this spare time on their hands, their presence online is massively amplified because they're always there. Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, obviously Dave said it quite well. The distributors, the prize of winning the popularity contest is that the worst people shout your slogans. And I think it's quite easy to kind of make a show that appeals to that kind of mindset. Neets are only like they're about 1% or something of the US population. And yeah, like I said, they got no respect, no power. And so appealing to that demographic just doesn't get you anywhere. You're better off having a show that is watched by 10,000 people in positions of influence than you are having a show that is watched by a million neets because they just can't make anything happen. And that's why, the sort of, oh, yeah, I'm sucking life out of the system is just, it's not. It's a waste of time and you're completely powerless. And I think the reality is, in the long run, capable people don't want to be associated with the lowest common denominator. And that's why you never want to have that associated with your political movement. But, I'm not attacking anyone individually there. It's something that is kind of could become an issue. And now you see it with AA as well, who's sort of like, and I don't think he's sort of abandoning his politics necessarily so much as abandoning the sphere of of thought that we're in. And I mean, part of the reason we're in the problem that we're in the mess that we are is that the right were completely driven out of intellectual circles, and you need your intellectuals. Um, and I don't like it when like people say, "Oh, I'm embarrassed to have been a part of it," or they, suddenly start promoting people who they were telling you were terrible sort of 5 minutes ago. I don't think that's the way to go about things. But I mean, looking back to the very sort of beginning of this, people started abandoning the left when they started saying things that were just obviously untrue. I mean, I sort of back at the very beginning of this, or even maybe sort of 2011, I think is when I would have started to move from being a left winger to more right. And obviously that was the culture war accelerated that process. But also, I think it's important to remember that MAGA doesn't define the right wing, but it can't. If it just the thing is, if it just descends, which it kind of it looking like it, if it just descends into a personality cult around Trump, that's just not something many. That's not going to be any kind. people are not just going to get on board with that, and it's going to descend into QAnon level bullshit, and no one's going to want to be a part of it. And yeah, it seems to me we're really at a stage where we need to not abandon, but accept the fact that a political solution probably won't happen. And for all our best attempts, it seems that the Kali Yuga is upon us. Um, I mean, obviously, in Britain, the political situation at the moment is just dire. The way reform just fucking just they didn't even throw Rupert Lowe under a bus. They literally sabotaged their best MP. Um, which, and when you consider, there was a sort of momentum behind them that people were like, oh, maybe, but that's just gone now. It's so gone. And in Europe as well, there's an example. This is from a few years ago, but there's an example I want to talk about as to why it's so hard to find a political solution. For example, like, AFD are now they were the top party in a recent German poll with 25%. But if they need to get 50, because if you look at what happened in Belgium a few years ago, there was an election where it was the Vlaams bloc and another kind of right wing party. I don't know what they were called, but they basically were the two biggest parties in the election. They won, the Vlaams bloc were the biggest and the other one, but they didn't quite have 50% between them. And so then, despite them being the two biggest parties in the parliament, Belgium spent 500 days without a government as all the other parties worked together to build a coalition that kept them out of it. So, yeah, I really don't think I don't see many places where a political solution is going to happen in time. I mean, I'm not criticizing people who continue to try and do things politically and try and change things on a large scale. But for me, I don't know. I just don't see it happening. And another thing I wanted to mention, as these are just kind of unscripted rambles, obviously, where I can just vent my ideas, is I always see people online kind of arguing over like which country is the most fucked in all of this. And it seems to me that that's the wrong sort of divide to look at. I think as we sort of, experience more and more social and economic decay over the coming years, the real divide is rural urban. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're necessarily in UK, America, or France, wherever, Sweden, whatever country. It's in the cities where it's going to be worse. And if you're in the countryside and you've got, say, some element of self-sufficiency and power and some kind of connection, a closer connection to food networks, you're going to be a lot better off. I mean, when Rome collapsed, if you were a Roman citizen, then obviously that was a big problem. Whereas if you were a farmer in Gaul, it just meant that you now gave, 10% to a blonde king rather than 90% to, the Roman senator. So that's going to be where the big difference is. I mean, I'd rather, I don't know, be somewhere like Maine or Washington than Birmingham in the UK. But then I'd rather be maybe in the Outer Hebrides than in Detroit. So I think it's people look at that the wrong way. But if you're interested in that sort of thing, you should definitely check out Forward Observer, who has a great YouTube channel. Stay up front. And yeah, he did a really good breakdown of if a kind of civil war happened in the US, how it would go down. He spent some time as a ranger in Iraq, so he's got experience of dealing with like sort of insurgency, civil unrest, that sort of thing. Because I mean, I live in Exeter, which is one of the nicer cities in the UK, and I mean, my 15-minute walk to work the other day, sort of through the centre of town, was basically to run a gauntlet of the mentally ill. And I think when you commute to work in a city, that's more and more what you're dealing with on a daily basis. And it's all so tiresome. Yeah, because if if you imagine Western civilization as a kind of a massive, like, a ship liner like the Titanic, and you and a couple of the other passengers have realized that the captain is sailing towards an iceberg. And, what's the best course of action? Do you try and persuade the rest of the passengers that this is going on and you need to overthrow the captain and change course? And also, changing course, getting us, a lot of our civilizational problems might, I don't know, can they all be solved with politics? I don't know. Um, but yeah, is it worth doing that, or do you just go for the lifeboats? And then one day, hopefully, you'll find an island and you can start again. Because yeah, I don't think, obviously, I don't want to say that it's over for Western civilization, but I really do feel we're about to enter a very dark period in our history, and it's not going to be a lot of fun, and some pretty bad stuff is going to happen over the next few decades. But we'll just have to wait and see, and yeah, hopefully you'll join me again as I go on these unhinged rants about my feelings on everything. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you later.